Thank you, everyone, and hello. My name's Bryoni Trezise, and together with Caroline Wake, I'm co-lead of the Australian Creative Histories and Futures project. We're based on Bedigal lands at UNSW on Kensington campus, and I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners today that we're on Gadigal lands, and actually that our partners are respectively on Kaurna, Wurundjeri, Warrawarong, Bunurong countries across Australia. And in particular, to maybe just note with a particular accent the relationship between creative histories and futures and the ways in which we can attend to and pay attention to and listen to with deep care the knowledges that are brought forth by working with the languages and practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have been the custodians of the arts in their many forms since the first sunrise. For over 60,000 years, they've been the original storytellers, artists, performers, shaping the land and the people who have cared for these stories. Okay, so I'm going to do kind of scene setting and introductions, and Caroline's going to bring it all home with everything that we've done. We are also one of the newer projects on the ARDC spectrum. So yeah, but we're very much excited with what we've got to share with you today. Introducing the ACHF project. We all know that Australia's cultural history spans decades of artistic practice, public investment and cultural participation. However, much of this data has remained difficult to access in a unified way. We also know that the ways in which the arts are lived by the artists and audience are an ecosystem that is in constant and continual crossfeed. A crossfeed that is not always visible in the traditional separation or siloing of art forms, their histories, their respective research methodologies, and what is often experienced as an impasse, and we've heard this theme, I think, across the presentations that have come earlier, an impasse between sector-based artistic, scholarly knowledges, interests and purpose. So ACHF, Australian Creative Histories and Futures, brings together some of Australia's most enduring cultural data sets. There they are, as well as experts in government agencies, academia, and artistic practice, with the aim of building a more connected, accessible and sustainable research infrastructure for the arts. We do this because we champion the arts as the original infrastructure and the lived cultures that cultivate the arts as ones that deal in those most precious languages of experiment, metaphor, gesture, voice and story. So the aim of the ACHF is to make the inherent interoperability of this rich creative and cultural ecosystem more visible. In short, the ACHF is not only in the business of designing data systems to represent knowledge about the arts. Our aim is to develop ways to showcase the arts as human knowledge, and more than this, to expand and deepen understandings of the vital role that creative knowledge plays in our national culture more broadly. And I just want to do a particular acknowledgement that everything that Caroline and I are presenting today has actually been supported by a huge and amazing team. So that's just by way of, we have a panel this afternoon where many of our team members will be up and talking, but it's just Caroline and I standing up here at the moment. So why might we need to do this and for whom? So imagine that you're a designer. You began your career in the visual arts in the 1980s. You branched out to some set design in theatre in the 1990s, and as one of the first First Nations artists working across forms, you then cut your teeth driving some of the most iconic aesthetic styles of Australian cinema in the new millennium. You're now retiring, you have a website, data entries in three major art form assets, and a box of some of your very first sketches in the attic. But there's no central database, no IMDb for Australian artists to track your history, to preserve your legacy across these art forms, nor the networks or constellations of activity your work has activated. There's no unified framework which ensures your works will be preserved with appropriate attribution, levels of access and acknowledgement of Indigenous custodianship as well as provenance. Or perhaps imagine that you are the CEO of a small to medium arts organisation and find yourself on any given day assessing applications for an expert panel, developing new work, sifting through your organisation's archive, also housed in a storeroom, for your upcoming 50th Jubilee, reporting on outcomes for a work you've just completed, and when you're reporting, you might be reporting to a range of entities, a government agency, the NDIS, the Australian Sports Commission. There's no central reporting platform or no centralised way for you to easily access and record these multiple forms of data. There's also no easy way for you to benchmark your organisational impact against others, nor to use that data to inform further programming. Or imagine that you're a researcher, and I use that moniker with the broadest, most encompassing sense of what it might denote. So you might be a researcher anchored in industry, in government, or in a university, or in just community. And you might want to understand how a particular form of arts investment has impacted that community. For this, you will need not just footfall data or metrics, but a way to map the flow-on effects of creative activity within a geographic area over time. This, in turn, might showcase how networks of artists develop, expand and produce work, and how practices of experimentation or creative constellation build what a recent report in regional arts refers to as the creative capacity of communities, or what a 2024 New South Wales Health Report into the role of arts has called the transfer of skills in experimentation, divergent thinking, collaboration and more. I'm referring to the Health and Arts Framework from New South Wales Health published last year. So why this matters? We've been speaking a lot in our project about how we are at a particular generational moment, and we're thinking of it as a generational opportunity because these are just some of the complex and interrelated needs that the national creative arts ecology experiences around its cultural data. We've spoken with experts. Caroline's going to talk in detail about some of that. And they have described this ecology as a complicated patchwork. That's their language. It's full of potential, but it's also on a precipice. More than this, it presents a generational opportunity and also responsibility to set the future frameworks by which some of these challenges can be addressed. So our findings to date, and we do have a survey that's still open that Caroline will also point to, indicate challenges in these areas: resource, funding and capacity. So across the cultural sector, there's limited and inconsistent funding, which impacts those organisational capacities to develop, sustain and innovate in good data practice. There's high staff turnover that impacts institutional memory. Digitisation, data management and archival work requires specialist skills that small organisations cannot afford. There is also, and this is again a theme we've heard, a fragmented data ecosystem. Disconnected databases are spread across government, universities and arts organisations, each collecting data in incompatible formats. There's little interoperability between major repositories, and fragmentation leads to duplication, redundancy and missing information. There's also, of course, First Nations, cultural and community issues. So datasets and organisations are highly aware of the multifaceted needs, as well as governing policies such as ICIP, government legislation and RAPS, which can help to formally action Indigenous data governance priorities and pillars. But there is no uniform approach or guidelines specifically to follow. The sector is screaming out for some streamlined guidelines. And data sets and organisations of all sizes do not have the means to implement these processes on a large scale. There are also administrative and bureaucratic barriers. So there's a huge administrative burden of data management, which weighs heavily on artists and small to medium organisations, repetitive reporting, requirements for grant acquittals, complex compliance processes, and fragmented state or federal guidelines, which create inefficiencies and fatigue. And there are technical and digital challenges. So digitisation and digital preservation, this was mentioned yesterday, storage being one of kind of the naughty words that we're not allowed to mention, present complex digital technical obstacles across the arts and GLAM sectors. So organisations face deteriorating analogue materials, institutions lack the equipment and expertise to digitise or to recover materials safely. How our project is responding. We're working. Obviously, we can't address all of these challenges at once, but we're certainly aiming to lay some foundations with awareness of their future significance. So we're beginning by working with the challenge of working across 4 major data assets. We're working with AusStage, which is based at Flinders, the Australian live performance database, hosted by Flinders with over 500,000 records, mapping the history of live performance nationally. We're working with the DAAO, Design and Art Online Australia, a freely accessible scholarly data resource with 30,000 individual entries, including almost 2,000 Indigenous cultural records. We're working with Creative Australia, some of their historical investment data, which documents 5 decades of national arts advisory and funding activity. And we're also working with ACMI, formerly known as Australian Centre for the Moving Image, including data from things like its amazing Constellation exhibit, which has 1,600 unique links between films, TV, video games and art. Hence my example before about someone who's moved across these different art form histories and contributed to the Australian cultural life in those particular contexts. So our aim is to make these data sets sustainable and interoperable, ensuring they can talk to each other and evolve into the future to address some of the needs or use cases I raised earlier. We're also committed to Indigenous data governance, recognising the right of Indigenous communities to control and represent their own data. This has meant working collaboratively with partners, establishing an Indigenous advisory group in collaboration with consultation with the wider sector, and particularly Indigenous art companies and national GLAM institutions. And we're working, I'll just particularly acknowledge Nina Gray, our Indigenous Research Fellow, who's also anchored at UNSW. Nina was hoping to be here today, but she's unwell. You may be online, Nina. Shout out to you if you are. Nina's working to develop a set of principles specific to the arts in the ACHF platform. These principles will underpin how data is perceived, interpreted, cited by users, as well as how it's findable, accessible and controlled by correct owners of the data. We're doing something very exciting in working with the creative use of creative data. We're inviting scholars, artists and cultural organisations to experiment with how data can be reimagined as creative material. And I suppose if we're thinking about that language of capability, I would suggest that that's one thing that's a very, very unique output and kind of discovery framework of our project that might indeed have some translation to some of the other projects as well. And finally, we're working in sector upskilling, ensuring that critical data literacies become shared capacities across the arts ecosystem. So part of this approach is to consider the vast knowledge that is retained in the sector. We've been speaking with people in the sector. We've heard consistent calls for coordinated national leadership to integrate platforms, to improve interoperability and to establish a standardised cultural data infrastructure that can link these different communities around creative, academic and policy more effectively. So some of the questions that we're asking as we build this project, and we don't necessarily have the solutions yet, but we're asking the questions. How can we maximise the potential points of intersection between the ranges and forms of creative arts and cultural data that exist? I've mentioned the forms of data that these are, so I won't repeat that. What insights about cultural production, its history, its cycles, how it's made to happen, could we make visible with what we build? And here I note frameworks from French theatre historian Clarisse Badiou, who identifies creative data traces as constellations that inform. She just has some very helpful languages around thinking about network, cluster and composition. So in the range of conversations we've had, people are very keen to think about things like career trajectories over time. That's network, cluster, a creation context, how things are made in a context and the ripple-on effects to community, and also composition, the compositional life cycle of a work, what's engaged in processes of how we make and think about making. A huge question and point of discovery is one that we're working through as we go. What does it mean for us to collaborate across sectors and disciplines to design these systems? And the aim, of course, is to design systems that enable for analysis to happen more equitably, more accessibly, and perhaps more fulsomely than it has to date. How can we listen to the needs of the sector? How can we ensure that we listen to the needs of artists? And how can we ensure that the forms of data system we're designing enable rich pictures and nuanced insights to take place just above kind of analytics? And how can we heed the critical data literacies already held by the experts with whom we've spoken? How can we mobilise these to expand and deepen conversations taking place? Okay, so what sets this project apart? We've identified, Caroline's going to go through our streams in detail and where our project is up to. But kind of an overarching conversation we've had across those themes is how do we make choices about where we're going to focus points of attention? So diversification is a principle that will be guiding how we consider our strategies of inquiry moving forward. And diversification applies, well, basically, first of all, it acknowledges that within the data sets that we're looking at, there are certain places, peoples and times that are captured and some others that are not. And likewise, it also acknowledges kind of on a technical plane that certain data models are prioritised and enabled within existing databases and certain others are not. So we're kind of thinking of diversification in our project across 3 dimensions: broadening and deepening data assets, data richness, advancing technical infrastructure, technical robustness, and strengthening skills and capacities of the user community. And we're aiming to provide those insights across some core thematic areas. These include creative careers, resilient communities, creative wellbeing, community data governance or disability-led arts, and cross-art form experimentation. So by addressing the fragility and fragmentation of our data ecology, we're hoping to contribute to the preservation of overlooked histories, to strengthen creative infrastructure and to demonstrate how diverse art forms operate as an interconnected system. Now I will hand over to Caroline to talk about what we've achieved so far. I'm off. All right, thank you. This is tricky, okay. Thanks, Bryoni, and thank you for the opportunity to share our achievements thus far. So just for context, we are, like the SSIRN, a relatively new project. Unlike LDACA or IRC, we're not in our second phase of investment yet, and even unlike the AIO, we're not coming out of an established centre of excellence. So even though we are working with established data sets and long-standing data sets, so the DAAO and AusStage are both databases that were established in the late 90s, early 2000s as part of a suite of cultural databases funded via the AIC LEAF scheme. As a collaboration, we've sort of come from a standing start. In addition, we also had a moment of project redesign in January, so that's not a timeline or experience I would recommend to you, but it did enable us to address some of the feedback we had to the draft project plan. So for instance, we were thrilled when we could bring in the DAAO and its director, Dr. Scott East, so that we could address the sort of underrepresentation of the visual arts. So we had some visual arts via Creative Australia, but not enough. And likewise, we were also delighted when ACMI could come on board so that we could address the underrepresentation of screen. So onwards and upwards, as we have said in various meetings. Let's go. We are in an intense project initiation and discovery phase. So we have spent most of this year focusing on delivering 10 reports. I'm not sure why we did this to ourselves. There are 12 reports within the project and 10 of them are due by December. I won't take you through them blow by blow or one by one, as thrilling as they are. I'll just foreground a couple of key reports because they're going to be foundational for the infrastructure we build. So this is the landscape analysis. So
To our knowledge, or as far as we can tell, and we have searched far and wide, this is the first foundational report about the cultural data sector in Australia. So there was no existing landscape analysis for us to build on or extend or bring into the current moment. We had to do a fair bit of work from scratch. So in addition to compiling a list of available data, we've also sort of set out to speak to the sector itself. And we've done this in a couple of ways. So we've employed both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. The quantitative survey has garnered more than 200 responses. It's still open, so feel free to click on that QR code and complete. And from that, so it's just a kind of caveat, these are very preliminary findings and that it may change. The people who have responded are researchers in universities, government agencies and peak bodies. We've also spoken to major arts organisations as well as small to medium arts organisations and independent artists. The survey revealed that in addition to AusStage, the DAAO, Creative Australia and ACMI, researchers are working with a huge range of data sources. So they might, for instance, be going to the ABS, they might be going to APRA AMCOS to get music data, they might be going to IMDb to try and pull some film data. They're also working with administrative data from a huge range of government departments, and we had underestimated just how many departments they were going to. When we spoke to researchers located within those government departments, we also discovered that they were working with a huge range of data. So they are sometimes, if they are not commissioning research, sometimes purchasing or licensing data. So for instance, they might be purchasing data from a bank or spend data from a bank in order to assess how a festival has impacted a nighttime economy. They might be purchasing data from a streaming platform in order to understand just how much Australian content is there. There are often fairly tight restrictions around that data. So we've also discovered that sometimes government departments are paying each other fees in order to access these data sets. So that will be an interesting kind of problem to contemplate. Within the survey, the final question gives participants the option to opt into a 60-minute qualitative interview, and to our great surprise and occasional panic, more than 70 people have volunteered. So I think that's an unusually high conversion rate and it speaks to the kind of magnitude of the problem and the keenness of the sector and researchers wherever they are located to speak to us about data. So in these conversations, we see a series of themes emerging. We call them data cultures. So we're trying to map, on the one hand, cultural data, where it is, who holds it, how they're managing it. We're also trying to understand data cultures. So practices and enacted, embodied kind of realities of managing it. One school of thought that has to be acknowledged is the data as anathema. We nicknamed it. So this is a group of people who are unpersuaded by data. We're kind of the skeptics, in particular quantitative data. They believe data is of little relevance or consequence to the arts, that it's unable to communicate the immersive, affective experience that is making, participating or consuming art. I'm not sure we can help this group. We do hope to persuade them by 2028, but that's sort of a school of thought that needs to be factored in. And I've seen it in some of the literature elsewhere, particularly in Indigenous data governance, around a kind of quantitative avoidance theme that comes through. On the other hand, at the other end of that spectrum is a group of enthusiasts who understand data as an asset. So they are very keen on data, and this comes through in a range of ways. So it might be a university researcher making the case to a library to invest in a particular piece of software or a particular piece of digitisation equipment, and the kind of argument that seals the deal is, if push comes to shove, if budgets change, we will have a valuable collection and it could potentially be monetised. Likewise, we we hear it from artists who see their data as an asset, and in addition to running a personal website, having a comprehensive record of their artistic practice on a nationally visible database has the potential to generate more work for them, and they therefore understand their data as an asset. I think the flip side of this is that some artists and arts organisations are experiencing the cultural data sector or economy as extractive. So for instance, we spoke to an author who is unable to access their data or record on AusStage unless they happen to be undertaking tutoring at a university at the same time. We also spoke to arts organisations who feel that the value of the data they are handing back to, say, government agencies is sometimes roughly equivalent to the grant they got. So they might have a small $5,000 grant from a particular organisation or agency, and they feel as if they are handing $5,000 worth of, quite valuable data back. But the vast majority of people we spoke are somewhere between the data as anathema and data as asset school, and they are in this school of thought that see data as imperative but inadequate. So they see it as imperative because for a range of reasons, and language we heard included data enables network analysis alongside an archival analysis. Data facilitates benchmarking. It helps us to make the case for further investment. It impacts policy. Data enables storytelling about our organisation. And in particular, data enables us to evidence our value and impact in a way that some other methods don't. But they see it as inadequate for a few other reasons as well. So on the one hand, they feel as if they are handling too much data. And this, we think, we're not completely sure, over the past decade, because dedicated arts funding has diminished somewhat, artists and arts organisations have sought to diversify their funding base. So in order to get a particular program, exhibition or series of workshops up, in addition to seeking funding from, say, City of Sydney, Create New South Wales and Creative Australia, they might also be going to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Health, we've heard, Sports and Recreation, Department of Communities and Justice, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So they are handling a huge swathe of data. It's often highly sensitive data, for instance, about people's disability status. And they're doing so with great care, even if they don't have documented protocols and policies in place. But they do experience this as a burden. And on the flip side, there are researchers who are not completely aware that we should be looking, in addition to kind of retrieving data from Creative Australia or Create New South Wales, that we should in fact have checked the Department of Health in order to understand the dance and dementia program. But you need to check Sports and Rec in order to understand the number of dance studios and people participating in dance classes. And you need to check the National Arts Participation Survey in order to understand the number of people attending dance performances. So it's unwieldy and ripe for, I think, some corralling. There's also too little data. So on the flip side, people are collecting all of that data. It's not necessarily the data they need or want. And in particular, they've told us that they are often collecting data about outputs, the number of artists commissioned, the number of paintings sold, the number of audiences who attended, the number of performances staged. But that's not for them what they would like to document. So for instance, for most, in fact, of the people we've spoken to, art's value and impact lies not in outputs, but in outcomes. So the process that was enacted, the well-being experienced, the relationships formed, and the medium to long-term networks and collaborations that seeded. So the play itself may have been unremarkable, but the relationships and the collaboration or the introductions that it facilitated actually means that an ensemble formed and they produced an extraordinary amount of work over the next 10 to 15 years. So that is not currently being captured. The no longitudinal data is we all know longitudinal data is the most expensive and difficult to collect, and the arts are experiencing it as well. And then we get to where the issue of shared data and interoperable data. So there's relatively little sharing. And I think this is where we stand in contrast possibly to the Internet Observatory, which finds itself trying to research an industry that does not necessarily want to collaborate with researchers and universities. On the contrary, we find ourselves trying to research with industry partners who are absolutely desperate to collaborate, but don't necessarily have the resources and means to do so. I'll just hit on. The other foundational report is the Indigenous Data Governance Report. And again, yes, I hope Nina is online, this report has been led by Nina Gray, and it's involved, again, a literature review, a landscape analysis, a self-assessment of partners about their current governance practices, and very shortly some more consultation. So this report has found that the literature is dominated, of course, by health, social sciences and law, but where the arts, creative and cultural sector is addressed, it's often via studies on GLAM, so galleries, libraries, archives and museums. Our concern is that when the arts are defined as GLAM, they inadvertently absent theatre, performance, dance, music, literature, film, television and video games, and these are precisely the arenas in which First Nations artists have been able to enact self-determination. So they're not going into established GLAM organisations to repair. They have, are in community-controlled organisations who are kind of producing and managing their data. So there seems to be little to no research. No one seems to have spoken to these organisations, and Nina is just about to. But that's, I guess, speaks to, again, the kind of lack of research in the space and the distinction, the amount of research it is taking in order to build the research infrastructure, actually. Other observations include shared strengths and challenges and opportunities. So strong Indigenous data governance is occurring in the arts where there are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff, or where non-Indigenous staff with deep understanding of cultural safety are working. It's occurring where there are legislative and policy frameworks in place, so enabling acts for particular institutions, mobilise a particular response. It's also occurring where there are broader engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, so organisations who have a reconciliation action plan in place might not call it Indigenous data governance in their policies, but are enacting kind of Indigenous data governance practices. Best practices, are happening. They're not always, and in fact, people tell us, we don't necessarily have an Indigenous data governance practice, and then proceed to detail quite a thoughtful, careful, slow and consultative approach. So, it might not be documented, but it is enacted. Of course, all of this is challenging, and while organisations are doing well with contemporary data, they continue to struggle with historical data. And with the task of reparative description as well as facilitating culturally appropriate access. There's a gap between what is documented and what is enacted, as I've said. And there's also high awareness of forthcoming ICIP legislation and high anxiety about how they might comply with it. So there's kind of the sector is on alert for this. In addition to speaking to other people about their governance structures, we've also implemented our own. So we have a steering committee, an Indigenous advisory group, a technical advisory group and a research advisory group. And just to be clear, sometimes people see this as an either or, it's a both and. So Indigenous representation is both embedded within the steering committee, all of the advisory groups, and there is a standalone Indigenous advisory group to talk through particular issues. And the way the project plan is structured means that certain reports can't even get to the steering committee unless the Indigenous advisory group has endorsed it. So I've mainly been talking about social infrastructure. We are also at work on the technical infrastructure. So we have migrated AusStage from Flinders service to Nectar, and what an adventure that was. We've also been writing ingestion, curation, retention and dissemination reports, as well as looking at data ontologies and thesauri and interoperability. So I won't talk you through all of the details. Maybe I can take questions or refer you to our tech team. I think maybe an example would do here. So one of the things we are looking at in the data ontologies report is every one of our partners is handling disability-related data. So AusStage has a dedicated disability arts data set. We know that Creative Australia is also handling data to do with disability arts, likewise ACMI, and likewise the DAAO. But all of that work is tagged slightly differently. It has a different set of ontologies and vocabularies associated with it. So one of our first tasks is to look at the extent to which we could develop a common or standard vocabulary that would facilitate searches across those data sets and help us to start pull together a bigger, better, more detailed picture. This is, I think, one of the most exciting things we've had, and I shouldn't have closed the computer, this year. So credit to the Flinders team in particular. This is our creative use of creative data stream. And this stream employs a creative professional or artistic domain expert to mobilise, reimagine and generally play with our data. So this year, Flinders University employed a director to devise a production based on an AusStage dataset. So described as a curated anthology of scenes from pivotal South Australian theatre productions, works that challenged form, ignited cultural debate and helped reshape our understanding of what theatre can be. And if you are a theatre aficionado, you will know that's a Pina Bausch reference up there. So Shock of the New not only helps to understand Adelaide theatre, it also helped to reshape our understandings of what working with data might be and look like. So that was the live production. They're also at work on a digital version, which will be online in time for the summer school in February. And we hope is the start of, there are a series of each year and across each data asset, as well as towards the end, commissioning creative professionals to work with data across various data sets, how to present creative data back to the creative sector via a method and a mode and a genre they understand and appreciate, so that they see themselves reflected back. And I think February is the right date, isn't it, Chris? Yes. All right. So next steps. So this is either in the room or online. We are close to final versions, but they are not final versions and they have not yet been endorsed by the Technical Advisory Group or gone to SteerCo. So that will happen in March. If you have ideas, questions, concerns, or suggestions for the technical solution, now is the time to talk to us. So if you would like to talk to me in the break, or if you would like to be put in touch with our technical team, please let me know. We have front runners, I guess, in terms of interoperability options, but it's not set. So we're happy to speak with you. This goes to future plans and priorities, and obviously we are at work, and one of our kind of outcomes and output will be to devise some Indigenous data governance guidelines for the sector. But part of what has come through in the conversations are some other priorities from the sector, and this is we're just contemplating to what extent, how flexible the project plan is looking and to what extent we can accommodate them and to what extent it might be a matter for phase 2. So digitisation, I know, is old, but it continues to concern the sector, not only their magnetic media, also their born digital. They're finding it hard to manage. Likewise, datification was a sneaky attempt to put in storage, but this is also coming back to us. So on the rare occasions that organisations have secured a grant to digitise their holdings, they then have a huge amount of data that they can't necessarily afford to store or maintain. So there's no central repository currently for them to, or even back up what they're holding. So, you know, organisations who've managed to digitise 50 years worth of artistic practice then, you know, didn't fully anticipate the storage cost and are looking for other options. Likewise, they're looking for improvements in their data profiles. So one of the things that came back to us is they're very keen to have their data in AusStage and the DAAO and other data assets. They would like it to be more complete. They themselves don't always have the time and resources to do that work. So this may impact our training plans slightly. We will still run workshops and develop online materials to help arts organisations and artists upskill themselves. But having been told about the resourcing difficulties, just having a rethink in terms of how we can support them otherwise. And lastly, there's kind of a clear, one of the strongest languages that came through in the landscape analysis is this interest in impact. And here we find the arts and academic sectors travelling parallel paths and occasionally in a feedback loop. They are very keen to employ data to evidence their impact. And this goes to the kind of the kind of data they're collecting and the kind of data they would like to collect. And lastly, and this is where ACHF can play a role, they're very keen for a coordinated conversation. So they're in conversation with researchers at universities, they're in conversation with funding agencies, and it's sort of time for a more coordinated approach. So I hope this gives you a sense, and maybe I'm slightly ahead even, I can see people waving at the back to me. I hope this gives you a sense of the ACH project, its accomplishments to date. I also hope it gives you a sense, you know, with the NRI issues paper in the air, about how important the arts are. And, you know, the National Arts Participation Survey documents that 97% of Australians engage with the arts, 70% attend live events, music, theatre, exhibitions, performance. That level of involvement and engagement is not matched by the level of investment the arts have historically received in research infrastructure. And the small amount we've been able to do with, in our short time with the ACHF, I think indicates just how impactful, you know, how urgent that investment is and how impactful it has the potential to be. Thank you.
Any questions?
Kylie first.
That was wonderful. I loved that in all sorts of ways, and I got lots of questions. But my main question is, you talk about your two partners, and I suppose this is something that I've been reflecting on a little bit. You know, so Creative Australia and ACMI. I'm interested in, I mean, you've got government and you've got GLAM, you know, so to speak, and what their role is and how you're interacting with those partners and what they see value in from this project.
Yeah, sure. Oh, sure. Well, actually, I can see David Stewart from Creative Australia here. So I don't need or want to speak on your behalf, David. Do you want to speak? Do you want a microphone? Or will I take a stab at it and you? Another David is behind you with another. Yeah.
You're David from Creative Australia. I think from my perspective, 2 years into this country and the arts system here is that Creative Australia wants to be a contributor. We sit on a decades-long set of data. And to your point, Caroline, a moment ago, that data tells something of the value, the huge value and the diverse value that's been created over those decades. And we probably haven't done justice to identifying and mobilizing and sharing and actually analyzing, to be honest, acknowledging that a lot of it is collected for kind of administration and accountability purposes, but we live in a time and we have an opportunity to think about data as something that has real use and value and payback to the those that have provided it. So it's a start, but happy for you to add something as well.
I can do.
I can have a go.
Yeah, I can say something about ACMI, but
well, this is maybe a bit more overarching, but it's also, I'm thinking from the position of being a researcher anchored in a university and the value to us of working with sector-based partners. And that goes to obviously government agencies, but also just the creative arts organisations more broadly. And I think it goes to something that we haven't directly shared here, but kind of one of the anchor points of what will be our Indigenous data governance framework is this idea of, you know, creative wellbeing that fans out and with acknowledging data custodianship that extends to custodians of the originators of the data, who are the artists and the makers and the audiences who support and grow and generate that data. So there's no researchers about the arts if there are not the arts. Yeah, so if we're thinking about figure eights and feedback, that is the ecology. And I suppose there's again opportunity and responsibility from that vantage point to work with those partnerships, because in a way I also think that is potentially well, there's a question there around how we build that future of those partnerships and what it is to work across sector and across government and universities in this space. We know the creative arts is fragile and also kind of vulnerable. So we want to build capacity, and I think that's what we're doing by brokering these partnerships. Yes.
Just
Oh no, you've got your own.
I don't know if, am I still mic'd?
Yes.
Just to your point, Kylie, it has proven to be quite a useful little pilot set, because every time we looked at the DAAO and we looked at AusStage and we think we're onto a solution, and then we talk with GLAM via ACMI and we're like, oh, we don't have it quite right. You know, the open access databases that are established via the LEAF scheme are slightly different to the collections management software and the interoperability they're already doing internally to get various systems to talk to each other. And then we think, okay, no, we're closer to it. And then we talk to Creative Australia and then we realise, oh, you know, no, 2/3 of that solution is going to work and we're going to have to, you know, section out this particular data. Or so in that sense, it's actually proven to be extremely helpful. And even though it's only 4 data sets, it's actually indicative of the sector more broadly and has enabled us to do the thinking we need to do in terms of how we might, you know, support Creative Australia to get some stuff, you know, some more stuff more available. You know, how their privacy concerns align with ACMI's, to what extent they can make stuff available. So yes, it has like both the spread in disciplines and fields and practices alongside the scholarly government and GLAM partner. It's been productive and
also a steep learning curve.
yeah, exactly.
Can I go next? Robert here.
Robert,
I had a question. I was listening to you at the start, Bryoni, and then what you said there is really good. You can't do research on the arts without the arts, yeah? So you talked at the start around guides or guidance, particularly around data governance, data literacy, even Indigenous data governance for arts organisations or arts not-for-profits. I'm just wondering if you could briefly elaborate on maybe some of your plans around that, not researchers, but the arts not-for-profits themselves. Do you have anything like in line for that next year, things that those orgs can get involved in?
It's a bit hard to, Nina is obviously the person to answer that question and she's not here. So I feel a bit like I'd be speaking to, I don't know, my sense of where that's at. That might also be slightly different to Caroline's sense of where that's at. Yeah, I can talk about the kind of the first report coming out. I know that there's going to be further interviews. There's going to be some kind of conversations, and out of that, maybe building some momentum towards designing some frameworks. That's probably as nuts and bolts as I pin that down to, but yeah.
No, and just to continue that, so our hope is that after consultations and sort of, you know, very draft principles, that we could then work with partners to pilot, you know, so if we were to publish these guidelines, what would this facilitate for you? And as Kylie observed, we've got a fairly diverse kind of range of partners so that they could, you know, Creative Australia could say, we don't want instructions and we want questions to ask ourselves, or this section proved not less relevant, or and then based on that feedback loop start to work more broadly. You look thoughtful, so I'll catch you in the break.
Yeah. Wait. Peter.
Yes, that's you.
Someone talk, Peter.
No, the one right at the back I was looking at, but yeah, we'll come to the
Which one?
high the raw.
Lisa Marie, you got the mic.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about scale, because I understand that data sets are generally, you know, around numbers, names, participants, those types of things. I'm just wondering about the other paraphernalia, the materials, the pamphlets, the photos, the videos that a lot of companies are holding in spaces they can't afford to keep holding, and that at some stage it has to go somewhere. Is this scale going to be taken into consideration?
I reckon that's a resourcing question.
Yeah.
But I think we're also thinking, we're trying to imagine strategically how we address, so we can't do everything,
No.
but we can certain pilot models that have, in my head, I'm thinking about depth and breadth and kind of cross-cutting. So it's about thinking strategically about what those, if we go back to kind of diversity and we pinpoint some themes or companies or connected organisation, I don't know quite what. We have had ideas, but I think I don't.
I mean,
ready
Caroline's
to share
been
them
in
yet.
back rooms like performance
I know.
days, and the paraphernalia that's there, and every
Yeah.
company has these
Yeah.
dusty storerooms.
Yes.
So we are approached, I would say weekly, by an arts organisation that has an archive it can no longer care for. And this is where I think the both the overlap but also the distinction between archive and data is sort of coming through. So the sector has urgent questions, and we know we are not the only discipline with this problem, and this goes to collections maybe, Kylie, around just urgent needs around digitising material they have, offloading ephemera they have, so costumes they can no longer care for, programs they can't care for. Australia doesn't have a dedicated national facility specifically for the live and performing arts, so it's particularly acute in that area. But it's also, like we didn't write into the project plan a digitisation stream, for instance. That now appears to be a mistake. But maybe that's where we refer people on to the Community Data Lab, for instance, where there are other resources. But it is, the scale of the problem is clear.
Can I add something that's actually something you said earlier? The importance of your question, however, is also understanding these materials as kind of foundational to the cultural memory of the nation. Okay, so they are, when we get back to the kind of that sequence of data as asset, they are huge, they are and will be hugely valuable assets long term as well. So the urgency, I think, to kind of attend to that is really key.
Bryoni and Carolyn, great work. It's fantastic. And it feels like we've moved forward a long way in the arts. So well done to you and the rest of the team. I actually have a question about how, but I do want to make a comment, but my question really is, how long is Nectar projected to operate? What kind of system means it's going to keep operating into the foreseeable future? Is this the beginning of something that can go on for years and years?
There's so many people laughing in the room that I think one of them should answer the question.
I believe this has been handballed to me as possibly one of the people who could comment on it. David Hackman from the ARDC. I helped initiate the project and have a strong connection with how it's being positioned and also its role, I guess, as a longer term strategy. So very much what we're looking for is in this first 4 years is to establish how it can be done at all. Nothing exists. So this project is building out from taking together the streams of the data and actually trying to get to that idea of what can be an interoperability solution, what can be a way of improving accessibility, what can be a way that's practical of improving data governance from both Indigenous and community data perspectives. So this project's really building those foundationals for what will come next. It is an active part of the project to plan the next stages. So part of what will be going on as we go through it is actually articulating what are the next steps. So this project, as you saw with those exciting 10 reports, is spent a lot of time on discovery. And that's because we don't actually know, because no one's really invested in trying to understand the arts from a research infrastructure perspective prior to this point, as well as sort of as thoroughly as this project is doing. There have been previous attempts at various elements and they have got pieces of the puzzle, but no one's really brought it together as like an integrated whole. And that's what we really think Australia deserves. both from an arts researchers' perspective, but also as Australians from a cultural perspective. We could be gaining so much more out of the arts, and we could be contributing so much more into the arts and enriching ourselves as a society. And that's really where this project is positioned and what we're trying to achieve.
Now I want to make a comment. Thank you. That's clarified.
Just to give a big
I want to make a comment that came from the question below. I think AusStage, which I've been around for quite a while, has benefited greatly from not holding the data, the digitised data on the site. And some of those decisions that were made have really ensured its survival. And the reason I say this is I've been involved in other databases, and one that Rachel's a part of what Rachel Fincham does. Not all the artists agree to have their work digitised. So there is a stumbling block there that you don't assume that these archives that companies are putting forward, when you consult the artists, you don't always get a big tick, which creates all kinds of problems. And I have a research data collection that can only be accessed with approval from the university and the library because it's under wraps. So there are all these different conditions that artists might put on their data and I'm in favour of the kind of open access AusStage, keep it simple so it has a long life and can be accessed easily. If that means not everything's on it, so be it. You can indicate where to go. Thanks.
Yeah, I've got one from chat.
Oh.
I've got one, they've been waiting for a while. It's quite a long one, so bear with me, please. Thank you so much for this very rich presentation. I'm curious to understand how well or if existing arts-related ontologies capture conceptual and craft-related dimensions, for example, identifying specific acting, performance methods, visual arts methods, for example, lithography, film subject genres and influences, for example. Is this part of what you'll be looking at? If so, would you be able to share links to any existing vocabs and taxonomies that will be used as a basis of your ontology standardisation work?
So maybe I'll start and then I'll, Chris, you as the director of AusStage, maybe you want to step in. So there is no standard arts ontology or vocabulary. There's something close to it, the link arts data vocabularies, which we're looking at. But one of the fundamental difficulties is AusStage is an event-oriented database. The DAAO is a biographically oriented database. Yeah, and that's before we even get to the other data sets, which might be focused on works or funding events or something. So I think even, you know, with the ontologies, the options that we have looked at, almost everything is going to require modification of some sort. There's nothing out there that we can take off the shelf and make work. But I know you've been looking at this more closely, Chris, from an AusStage perspective, if you want to.
Thanks. Yeah, I think linked art is the obvious example of an ontology that was developed by visual arts researchers, which is being expanded to take in performance data. And so from that point of view, it does have some categories that go towards aesthetics. And that's one of the sort of stretch goals, I guess, of the project, is to think about, once we have the base interoperability that we're talking about here, how then might an aesthetic dimension be added to that? So if you can trace an artist from the DAAO into AusStage and into ACMI's collections, you have visual records in ACMI, but in the other two databases, you've got links outwards towards where those might be. So the interoperability solution that's being developed might lead us towards an aesthetic dimension, but it's not something that can be done with the without that interoperability solution. So I think that the linked art kind of ontologies map out a route towards that. And even if we don't adopt linked art across all of the data sets, at least making our existing ontologies compatible with linked art will allow us to kind of hook into that network of scholarship as it develops. And then perhaps the next phase of whatever is developed out of this project might then implicate that aesthetic dimension. But it's certainly something that we're very alive to, and a lot of the work that's being done around the research outputs of the project is trying to reach towards that.
So we're about to approach big lunch, and we got Amanda, E.T., and then we've got one from the most handsome man in the room over here, and then that will be it.
Thanks. I love the creative use of creative data. We could have creative use of HASS data in general. I think, if we could bring that in, that would be really exciting. But sort of a follow-on from your question about the ephemera in the back of performing arts organisations or whatever, the online ephemera and, everything, ephemera to creative acts and artworks and the audience tracking, all of that. I'm just wondering if you're thinking about that. Probably not now, but, as sort of something to that it's a lot of data there that people will be wanting to track, Spotify downloads, everything like that. So just wondering how you're thinking about that and the potential for connections there, and also potential for connection with the GLAM sector, particularly around social media archiving, and if that's something that's kind of been thought about yet.
I reckon it's on our wish list. So it's obviously you can hear the kind of the nuts and bolts that we have to sort out. But, one thing is to also kind of bring some of the more historical databases up to speed. So that's, I think, kind of focus point now. We're well aware that how art happens now today is not how it happened in the 80s or 90s or even 5 years ago. So I think it's so inspiring to hear the presentations here, because they're triggering all these ideas around how we could, once we're up to speed, then kind of incorporate. I mean, I wrote a note this morning after your presentation about X, and I can't remember what it was now, but it felt like a good research concept at the time, X in the arts, or just kind of conversations about the arts. So there's all kinds of ways in which we could, fan out to that. I don't know. It's not a very technical answer. It's more like a kind of a
it reminds me of a question I got in another context, which was, will you be working with Eventbrite? Data, which is also a source of absolutely a record of cultural activity. So yeah, to which I think the short answer is not in this phase. I can't cope, but it is absolutely part of assembling a detailed, comprehensive picture of Australians' cultural activity. Yeah. So we would love to collaborate. Yeah.
PT.
Hi, Petey Sefton from Aldaka. I just had two comments, which are really just things we should talk further about. One is with the ontologies, which we would probably call schemas to avoid people reading too much into it. But talking about shared schemas for talking about metadata for describing things, there's a lot of overlap. We've got lots of works and things in Aldaka that would probably be an overlap. We saw some nice, artwork of birds yesterday. So I think we should get together and talk about how we can interoperate between it's a research data commons after all, that's the point, or one of the points. And the other one was about access, open access. So I don't think we're still in the position where we have to say, and I've done this before, open access kind of equates to something that's a bit more sustainable. So we should just focus on that, and we can't deal with the rest of it. In Aldaka, we've had to deal with access control. Moises talked about it yesterday. And so we actually have some fairly straightforward protocols where a lot of things can be open, but if they can't be open, there are fairly lightweight ways you can add something to a database or a repository so that it can delegate authorization decisions off to somewhere else. So That's probably another thing for the ongoing discussion to see whether what we've done can work for what you would need for that.
We would love to have that discussion. Yep. And just we've also been looking at ARDC as a model for facilitating appropriate levels of access to various materials.
Last one.
Okay, thanks. Nick Teerberger, I'm from ARDC and Melbourne Uni. Sort of to the question of longevity and nectar, I think we've got to look at longevity as something that isn't fixed on nectar or NCI, or I mean, we've moved from all of those. We've been on all of those. We're on Amazon at the moment. So the data structure is the important thing that allows you to have longevity. Our project started with a LEAF grant that we said we would digitise 500 hours in the first year, and we did. I think you have to have runs on the board. I'd hate to see your project end after 4 years with a whole lot of paperwork and data structures, but no actual data. So I'd really encourage you to get a pilot project, get some data there, and then you can work out your schemas and your ontologies and stuff based on what you've got and grow it from there.
We hear you. Yeah.
No, noted, and we're on the same page. Yeah, thank you.
So she's catching what you're pitching.
Yeah.
So on that note, congratulations on winning the most questions asked of any session so far. Very well done. Thank you very much.